This is the second part of the Your First Knitted Sweater series here on my channel, and today we're going to continue where we left off last week. So we're going to continue knitting the body and then making the hem ribbing, and then next week we'll make the sleeves, and then finally you'll have your first knitted sweater. By the end of today's video, you will have finished your body and also made your hem ribbing and also learned the Italian bind-off method. I'm going to upload new instructions to follow alongside today's video. So you will find an updated page of instructions on my Patreon, which is linked down below. So do go and check that out, and do consider becoming a patron. As I mentioned last week, I set up a Patreon. This helps me make more videos and bring more tutorials like these to you faster. And my patrons will get a final pattern according to my sweater measurements from sizes XS to 3XL once this video series is concluded, so in a week. So do check that out, become a patron if you want to, or otherwise just go and get your free instructions there. If you haven't watched the first part yet, do go to the first video and check that out. I will link that somewhere up here or here and watch that, and then you can see the instructions up until right before we're sectioning off the sleeves. But now we're going to actually get started with sectioning off the sleeves, and yeah, let's get going. We finished our yoke. Now we're at the point where we have to section off the sleeves. So we're going to set the stitches for the sleeves aside and then continue without them for a while and just creating the body. So I'm going to show you how we do this now. I still have my 8mm needles on here. I'm at the beginning of my round, and first I'm going to slip my marker. From now on you no longer have to increase, so we're going to remove all other markers. So I'm going to knit 3 first. These are my raglan stitches. And the last row I did was a row where I didn't increase, but since we're now sectioning off the arms, we no longer need to increase, and I can remove this marker. Now I prepared my 2 other needles with cable and a 6mm needle each. Do that as well. Just screw the stopper on one end and the needle on the other end, and then we're going to use this to put our sleeve stitches aside. Now, the first section we have here between our markers is for the first sleeve. So I'm going to use my needle now, and I'm not going to knit the stitches, but I'm just going to slip them, just like this. As if I were going to purl the stitch, but then not actually pulling yarn over, just sliding them onto the other needle. And I'm going to do this until I arrive at the next marker. Okay, last stitch before the orange marker. Okay, now I'm going to take the orange marker off. I'm going to pull my needle through, quickly slide the other needle back so that you won't lose your stitches. And now I'm going to screw off the 6mm needles here. So take this away and just put the other stitch stopper onto this. And now you have the circle here. This is your sleeve. Your stitches are stopped here. We set them aside for now. We're ignoring these right now, and we're continuing here. Now, after putting the stitches aside, we have to cast on some new stitches here for our underarms. Because if we were to just continue like this, it will get a little too tight. So we're actually creating new stitches in row, for which we use the backwards loop cast on method. This means I'm taking the strand and holding it like this, holding it with all my fingers. And now I'm taking my thumb and I'm going over the strand, from over the strand, under it, and doing this. And now I'm twisting my hand until I see the strand here in the front. And then I'm just going to go under this strand, come up in the middle, and just let it go. And now I've already cast on 1 stitch with the backwards loop cast on method. So again, grabbing the yarn like this, going over the yarn and coming under with my thumb, then pulling it up so that I can see the strand here, and then I'm going with my needle under the strand, coming up in the middle, and then just letting go. Okay, one more time, under the strand and letting go. It's really easy. And the amount of stitches you're going to need to cast on here is depending on your calculations. So I'm going to cast on 4 stitches on each side of the arm. So I've casted on 3 and 4. So you're casting on half the number of stitches you're still missing to get to the right amount for your bust circumference stitch number. And now I'm just going to continue knitting here. So these were the last stitches I put aside. These are the 3 raglan stitches that I had from before. And now I'm just going to take my left needle and just knitting it as if there was no gap. So I'm knitting this, and now after knitting the first stitch, I'm going to pull it tightly here, going to pull on the strand. Then I'm knitting the second stitch, and I will be pulling here again so that the stitches are nice and tight, and then I continue, and now I can remove this marker. Now we're getting to the section that is either the front or back, so I'm just going to be knitting until I arrive at this marker, knitting all stitches, and I'll see you back there. And now I'm at my next orange marker. I'm taking it out again, and then I'm going to be knitting the next 3 stitches, which are the raglan stitches, and the raglan stitches will always be incorporated into the body. And now we're getting to the stitches for the second sleeve. So I have a purple marker that I remove, my second prepared needle and cable, and I'm going to be slipping again all stitches until I arrive at the next orange marker. So as we did before, just slipping them like this. Now I'm slipping again the last stitch. I'm removing the orange marker again and pulling the needle quickly out to have nothing fall off, and I'm attaching my last stitch stopper onto this. Secure it nice and tight, and now I have the second sleeve on hold here, and now I'm going to be casting on 4 stitches again with the backwards loop cast on method. You're going to cast on the number of stitches you cast on the other side that you need to get to the right number, and I'm doing this 4 times in total for my calculations, and I have casted on 4 stitches. And now I will just be continuing knitting on this side, now knitting the first strand. These stoppers might be a bit in your way, you have to push them aside, it's a bit annoying, but afterwards it's gonna be fine. I am tightening the stitch here, and I'm continuing with the next stitch and tightening again, and now continuing with the next stitch, removing this purple marker. Now everything that is left from markers is my beginning of round marker, which is my pink marker, and now I'm just going to be knitting until I arrive at the pink marker at my beginning of round mark. I'm now almost back at my pink stitch marker, but I quickly want to show you something. So my cast on stitches here, they have been pulled on a little, which is normal, but this means that they got a bit smaller and they're a bit harder to slide onto this. So just take 1 stitch at a time and slowly slide that on, or you can also do it fast, but just like slide that on until you get to a regular stitch, and then it's actually quite easy to pull them up. This is only hard in the first time that you are going to knit over them, but it's fine afterwards. So this is the last stitch of this round. I'm going to just slip my marker, and I'm going to just continue knitting without any increases or decreases from now on. It's very easy, but I'm showing you how it will go with the freshly cast on stitches. So I'm 1 stitch before the freshly cast on one, knitting this regularly, and now you see that you have quite a thin strand here, and you can pull on it quite a lot. Now what you're going to want to do is slide up your stitches to the front, but not too much, you don't want to drop them, right? And I'm always getting 1 finger to help me with holding the stitch in place that it won't be dropped off. So I'm holding it down with my thumb that it doesn't drop off the needle, and I'm getting my right needle and I'm just going in to knit. Now you will want to see that when you come out on this side that you really are in the middle of the strand and didn't like split the next strand or something, but just like as knitting regularly, you're going in and knitting it regularly. Okay, now we're pulling on this a bit to make the stitch a bit tighter. Now we're going on with the next one. Again, go in, see that you really, if you go in and you can pull on the strand and it gets larger, that means that you went in at the right point. If you go in and it's hard to pull on it, then you split your yarn. So I'm going in, it's easy to pull here, I'm grabbing the strand and I knit the second one. Okay, next one. Now I'm on the third, and now this one is my final one of the freshly cast on stitches going in. Okay, now there is going to be a bit extra yarn here. We're going to close that later with a trick. You can ignore this for now, but I'm just continuing knitting. And when we get to the next gap where we did the backwards loop cast on earlier, you're just going to do the same thing. And from now on, it's just repetition. From now on, you're just going to continue knitting in the round. No increases, no decreases, just knitting all stitches all of the time until you arrived at the required length. And the required length for you is the full body length you are going to want to get for your sweater minus the width or height of the ribbing we have on the lower end. So if you want your ribbing to be, for instance, 6 centimeters, which I am going to make it, then I will stop 6 centimeters before my desired length. Once you wash your sweater, it is going to grow a bit. It is going to become a bit longer. So keep that in mind. I know that the total length of my sweater is going to be 80 rows. So I want to come back and show you a next step 1 row earlier, meaning in my case, this is 13 rows before my end. Once you're there, come back and I'll show you how we finish our body. Okay, so I've quickly transferred half of the stitches onto another cable and needle I had laying around. If you don't have any more, you can also just get a piece of scrap yarn and quickly put it on there and secure it. But this is a really good moment. Sorry, this is the cable of my microphone. But this is a really good moment to try it on and see if everything fits. For me, it fits very nicely. I like it. It's at a very nice point between snug and still kind of comfortable. And I especially like the height of the collar. So this is a good moment to see if you did everything right, because if you didn't and it doesn't fit, there's less to open now than it would once you completed the entire thing. So yeah, that would be a good point to look at what you got. Okay, after 10 rows of knitting with only white again, I am now joining the next color. In my case, this is the lavender purple. And but nothing else changes. Like, this will just be held together with my main yarn for the next 10 rows, and then I'm going to cut it off again and knit further with my white yarn without any added yarn. Okay, that's 10 rows of the lavender color, and now I'm going to just cut it and let it be. Okay, I am now at the end of my body, so this is my last row before I'm going to switch to the ribbing. So I have 1 more row until I will start my ribbing. And this is a good point to try on your sweater now. So now you want it to be almost at full length. The only length that should be missing here is how long you will want to make your ribbing. Now, if the length is right for you and you actually want to go over to the ribbing, there is one last thing we're going to consider. Now, if you were to now start on the ribbing, then the sweater would be only like slightly cinched in. Not a lot, just a little bit, because the ribbing is a bit tighter. But if you want your sweater to be cinched in a bit more at the bottom, you could make some decreases on the next row. And this is kind of something, if you want to integrate that, you can. I don't want to. I kind of like the straight cut of the sweater I initially measured. So I will not be making any decreases here, but if you want to, you can just go ahead and when you're knitting your stitches, you can kind of calculate how many stitches you want to decrease to get to kind of the new width that you want. So if you want to make it, I don't know, like 5 centimeters smaller, then you can use the ratio you have from your gauge swatch to calculate how many stitches you will need to decrease. But if you want to decrease, you can just kind of calculate how many stitches that will be and then spread them evenly. I have I think 116 stitches, and if I want to decrease by 4 stitches, I would just divide all my stitches by 4, which means that after stitch number divided by 4 stitches, I would always knit 2 together. And knitting 2 together is quite easy actually. You're just going to go in through 2 stitches as if to knit, yarn over, and then pull the yarn through and drop them off. Now there is a little knitting hack. When you start your ribbing at the end of a sleeve or a body, in one row before you start the ribbing, you can actually already switch to the smaller size needle, because later once we start the ribbing, the purl stitches are going to kind of pull at the stitch above. So if you already switch to the 6 millimeters one row before, then you're going to tighten these down so that the stretching that can be caused by the ribbing afterwards is kind of then evened out because you're going smaller here. I'm going to make the ribbing held with a blue strand, and so I will be joining this in one row before. I've just finished knitting one row with the 6 millimeter needles, and now I'm going to actually start the ribbing. So the same as we did on the collar up on the neck, we are just going to always be knitting one and then purling the next, and we will just continue doing this all of the time and do this for however many rounds as you want your ribbing to be wide. And once you are finished, once you arrived at the end of the last row of your ribbing, we're going to meet back here and I will show you how to cast off the stitches. We have now arrived at the end of the ribbing down here. I finished all the rows and now we are going to bind off, and I will now remove the marker. And what I'm going to do now is make a stretchier bind off, use this end now and get it through my darning needle. Okay, so the Italian bind off method is essentially we're taking the needle and kind of recreating this stitch, that always the first stitch that we have here, so either a knit stitch or a purl stitch, and giving it kind of an edge that it looks like it flows over the edge. So first we have 2 setup stitches, and for the 2 setup stitches I will be going through this first knit stitch purlwise. Here you already see kind of the tangle potential, but it's gonna get better like the further we get in. And now the second stitch on the needle is a purl stitch, and I'm quickly going to go through that knitwise for my setup, and I'm going to go through it knitwise and come out on the back side. So I'm going through it like this, but I'm not gonna come out here in the front. I'm going to go to the back, which from the top looks like this. We're going through it like this. And now we can actually start the sequence of bind off stitches we're going to have now. So whenever the first stitch on your needle is a knit stitch, you're going to knit, going through with your needle knitwise through this first stitch and pulling it off the needle, and then going through this third stitch, which once I pull this off will be the second stitch. So the next knit stitch you have on your needle, you're going to go through it purlwise. So you can kind of remember it this way, that when you have a knit stitch in the front, you will take it off knitwise, and the next knit stitch will need the counter movement, so we're going through it purlwise. And the same thing if the first stitch is a purl stitch, it's exactly the opposite around. we take it off purlwise and go through the next purl stitch knitwise. So I'm going to show this to you now. Okay, so the first stitch is a knit stitch and I will be going through it knitwise. And when I go through it knitwise, I will push it to the front and pull it off the needle. And one tip I can give you, before you thread through the entire yarn tail, you can already go into the next knit stitch purlwise, so this way around, and also come back out in the front. You don't need to go in the back here, because then you can pull it through stitches at a time and not only one at a time. And I did it. Now, from kind of pulling it, you don't need to pull it very tight here, but also not very loose. So you kind of, after you pull it, you still want to be able to see the little purl bump here, but not to have like too much tension here. Now, the first stitch is a purl stitch, which I'm going to go through it purlwise and lift it off the needle. And now I will always be doing kind of the two motions for the purl stitches and the knit stitches in once and pulling the yarn through, because that's much faster. So to go through the next purl stitch knitwise, we are now in the back of the needle and we need to come back to the front, but then we want to go through it in this direction. And there's actually a good trick. So one way you could be doing it would be by now pulling out the entire needle and then going through the purl stitch as we did in the beginning. But you can actually make it a bit quicker by taking your needle and going like through the front strand this way and then pulling it out in the back. So I'm showing it to you again. I'm going over this kind of purl stitch here, and I'm going to go and gap my needle tip to come out on the right side of the back leg of the stitch. And then I kind of made the right motion, and then I can pull my yarn through so that I don't need to pull it. I can kind of save one time of pulling it through this way. And now we're back at the beginning of our binding of knit and purl stitches sequence. So we have a knit stitch here again. So I'm going to knit it off the needle and go through the next knit stitch purlwise, pull my yarn through. And now you already see kind of how it continues the stitch pattern here. We have a nice V shape from the two stitches we already bound off, and it just gives it an edge where it looks like your pattern flows over this seam, and that looks quite elegant. So it's a nice bind off. So the next stitch is a purl stitch. I'm going to go through it purlwise and lift it off. And I'm doing the thing where I go through the next one purlwise by coming through here, through the middle, between the stitches, and then pulling through the front leg and pull the entire yarn through. Okay, next one is a knit stitch again, and so on. And you will just continue the same way until you're at the end of the round, until you have two stitches left on your needle. And once you have that, I'm going to show you the rest. So I'll meet you back when you only have two stitches left on your needle. Okay, so I have my last purl stitch here, and now I have only two more left. Still the same motions as before. And now we're actually getting to the point where we only have two left. So I'm going to first take this one off knitwise the same way. And now that there isn't a gap here, you're going to want to, in this first stitch, which was your original first knit stitch, you're going to want to go through this one purlwise. So I'm going to be doing this now. I'm going through the stitch purlwise here, as if it were still on the needle, but we already bound that off before, but just do that so that we continue the pattern the same way. And now we're going to get the last stitch off purlwise, and I'm pulling the yarn through quickly first, and then with the purlwise stitch we would always come from behind to the front, and now we already are in the front because there is no more stitch. And then we go through the last stitch knitwise. So this here is the last stitch, and I'm just going to go through it knitwise to the back, and that's it. And now we've concluded the pattern. And I am not cutting the yarn here. I will just be weaving in the end. And this is something you will need to do with every single end you have. Also all the ones from the other yarns you attached. So you will always want to go through some loops that are on the back side and not visible on the front side in 3 different directions is kind of the rule of thumb that we're doing. And when you weave in the end on a ribbed edge, I most often go through kind of this row of knit stitches here, because on the other side this is a row of purl stitches, so I won't see it if I go through the bumps of the knit stitch here. And what I always also find quite satisfying and easy to do when you have a row of knit stitches like this, I just go in and kind of twist these knit stitches around my needle like this and go up just a few rows, not necessarily the entire length, that's not necessary, but just like I went in around half, and then I can just pull the yarn through. And what I also always do is when I go up a row of knit stitches like this, I also go back and kind of pull on it, because it's okay if it puckers up a bit here on the inside, it doesn't matter, but you don't want it to be like pulled together and then cinch in your straight edge here. We don't want that, so I will just be pulling it back out again a bit, and then I go back down on the same column on the other side. And now what I always do is kind of I go through the inner side of a purl bump here and pull the yarn back down again, and then I proceed and go up once more on a row of knit stitches the same way I did before. And then once I went in 1, 2, 3 and actually 4 directions here, and so I always, the last stitch I made, I always put a little knot in. The knot is never enough on its own, but when you've woven in the entire strand in several directions and then ending with a knot and making it really tight, it just helps to keep it in place. And then I'm just going to cut the yarn, do the same with all the ends of the Suri alpaca strands that I have here. When you're in the middle of a row, you can also do all of this in the end. I like to just sometimes in between go in and weave in some ends so that I don't have like 20 ends to weave in the end, but only like that I already made a few of them. So after I've bound off the body down here, I'll try it on again to see if everything fits the way I want it to, and it does, and I love it. So this is kind of where we're ending up after the second part. Now the only thing left to do is to actually knit the sleeves and then block our sweater, and then we can go ahead and wear it. But yeah, this is the look of the sweater once we finished the body. I hope you feel really proud now that you made your body, you finished the first body of your sweater and made your first hem ribbing and made your first Italian bind off. So to finish our sweater, you'll have to come back next week, and then I'll show you how to knit the sleeves, and then at the end we're going to block the sweater, and then that will be it, and you will have learned how to knit, knitting an entire sweater, which is pretty awesome. So do come back next week and check that out, and do go over to Patreon, download the free instructions following alongside today's video. If you like this video, please do leave a like below, comment and subscribe. You can also go over to my other social media channels and find me there, and I wish you a lovely week until then, and bye.